leave and just sign an agreement. That's all they wanted. We held back, and we got a good agreement, and that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump wants to renegotiate. And we will go to the table, Madam Speaker, but we are going to put Canadians first and foremost, as we have done for the last 9 years. Consistently, Madam Speaker, what we have witnessed from the opposition is no, no, no.
The member will have the time for the questions and comments after oral questions. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Nepean.
Madam Speaker, today is the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. In 2021, I stood in this House and called on Canada to recognize the sovereign state of Palestine. Today, I renew that call with urgency. New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman wrote 3 days back that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is defending a Jewish supremacist apartheid vision in the West Bank and Gaza. Yet, the Western nations, who holds the levers of power and influence, remain silent witnesses, allowing this catastrophe to persist. Canada must take bold and active steps towards justice, not just as a gesture of solidarity, but as a commitment to a just and lasting peace. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Saskatoon West.
Madam Speaker, my dear mother was recently going through some old papers and found a poem from the late 1970s she had saved all these years. In those days, we had Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. I was shocked at the similarities between then and now. Here's the poem. The Prime Minister is my shepherd, I shall not work. He maketh me to lie down on park benches. He leadeth me beside still factories. He restoreth my faith in the Conservatives. He guideth me in paths of unemployment. Yea, though I walk through the valley of soup kitchens, I shall still be hungry. For they are against me. They anointed my income with taxes. My expenses runneth over my salary. Surely poverty and hard living shall follow me all the days of this Liberal administration, and I shall live in a rented house forever. Madam Speaker, after 45 years, nothing has changed. His son, our current Prime Minister, has dragged Canada into an even worse mess than his father. Thankfully, it will be, once again, a new Conservative government to the rescue to fix everything the Liberals have broken. Let's bring it home.
L'honorable député de Pierrefonds-Dollard.
The honourable member from Pierrefonds-Dollard. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
To share an update in the West Island of Montreal. There was an exciting announcement made earlier this week in CLSC Pierrefonds, along with the Canada Space Agency, Swiss de West de Lille, and David St. Jacques, the astronaut. We talked about and unveiled a pilot project that deals with telemedicine. And telemedicine is a really innovative thing. It allows for healthcare to be delivered remotely, for physicians and for healthcare professionals to make assessments of us, individuals, people, but not face-to-face. It has real-world applications, but it was developed in outer space. This technology was actually made for astronauts, but it's now been applied here at home within Pierrefonds at the CLSC. So I really want to thank, j'aimerais remercier Lisa.
So I'd like to thank Lisa Campbell, the president of the Canadian Space Agency, and the entire team.
Center.
Today, on November 29th, marks the UN International Day of Solidarity with Palestinian people. So I offer this House and all Canadians committed to justice and peace the following reflection. Every bombed village is my hometown, and every dead child is my child. Every grieving mother is my mother, and every crying father is my father. Every home turned to rubble is the home I grew up in, and every brother carrying the remains of his brother across borders is my brother. Every sister waiting for her sister who will never come home is my sister. Every one of these peoples is ours, just like we are theirs. We belong to them, and they belong to us. Stop the genocide. Long live Palestine. Long live Gaza.
The honourable member for Argentan-la-Petite-Nation. The honourable member for Argentan-la-Petite-Nation. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to celebrate not one, but two 90th anniversaries in my riding. The La Chute and Buckingham Lions Clubs are celebrating this important milestone in their existence. It was on December 4th, 1934 that the Buckingham Lions Club was founded, followed by the La Chute Lions Club a few days later on December 11th, 1934. Madam Speaker, Lions Clubs are charitable organizations that help the less fortunate in the community, help young people, and improve the quality of life of the general population. They support a wide variety of causes, including blindness, deafness, health, education, youth, and seniors. Altruism, generosity, friendship, and commitment are among the values that they embody. I would like to wish all members of the La Chute and Buckingham Lions Clubs a happy 90th birthday and to sincerely thank them for their commitment to the vulnerable members of their communities.
Wow. Madam Speaker, repeatedly we are witnessing this NDP Liberal government's troubling tendency to prioritize the rights of criminals over victims. That's why I introduced the Pro-Victims' Rights Bill C-320 in March 2023. Thankfully, the bill has passed unanimously through this House and is now at the Senate committee stage. Lisa Freeman, a constituent of Oshawa and the inspiration behind Bill C-320, recently learned that the axe murderer who brutally murdered her father while on parole at the time will be subject to a closed-door review by the Parole Board of Canada. No hearing. Ms. Freeman's rights have been completely disregarded under the Canadian Victims' Bill of Rights, and she has continually been denied the rights afforded to registered victims, leading to repeated re-victimization, not by the perpetrator, but by the very institutions that should be safeguarding her well-being. If the NDP Liberal government refuses to recognize the need to prioritize victims' rights over those of criminals, it's time for an election so that a Conservative...
For Milton.
Today is the International Day of Solidarity with Palestinian people, and today I'm reaffirming my support for Canada's recognition for Palestinian statehood. Canada recently voted in favor of 2 UN resolutions to signal our deep concerns over the expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories and to express our unwavering support for Palestinian refugees that are in urgent need of assistance, and that UNRWA is critical in that regard. Canada remains committed to the pursuit of lasting peace in the Middle East. A two-state solution is critical to that endeavor, which includes the creation of a Palestinian state where Palestinians and Israelis live side by side in peace, security, and dignity. The Netanyahu government has made it clear with their words and actions that they reject a two-state solution, while illegal settlements and violence in the West Bank are on the rise. Canada does not recognize permanent Israeli control over the West Bank, East Jerusalem, or Gaza. We must see progress toward Palestinian self-determination. We need a ceasefire and sustained humanitarian aid. All hostages must be released. Madam Chair, peace in the Middle East is possible, and the recognition of a Palestinian state is an important step toward it.
The honourable member for Ottawa, West Nepean.
Madam Speaker, this week I attended the launch of the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence at Ottawa City Hall, hosted by Grand Advocates, Interval House Ottawa, and the Ottawa Coalition to End Violence Against Women. We joined together to light buildings in purple, including City Hall and the Peace Tower, to symbolize our determination to end violence against women. For the dedicated organizations and volunteers leading these efforts, activism is not limited to 16 days. It is 365 days a year. Our National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence and our Feminist International Assistance Policy provide funding to frontline organizations doing the hard work to support survivors and make real change. At a time when demeaning language and objectification of women is becoming normalized, we stand in solidarity to say this is not normal. Together we can end gender-based violence. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Chatham-Kent-Leamington.
The collective Western history of wealth creation has largely followed the history of energy densification. What do I mean? First, we cooked our food and kept ourselves warm with wood, then charcoal, followed by coal, fossil fuels, today's options of nuclear, and tomorrow's possibilities of hydrogen, etc. Each progressive fuel is denser and has less environmental impact. This government's focus on punishing our oil and gas production sector, coupled with a punitive carbon tax on consumers, is misplaced and bad environmental policy. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, what year did the world consume the most coal? It was last year, and this year we will break the record. LNG has half the GHG emissions of coal, and the world wants cleaner burning, affordable Canadian LNG. Instead of using the wealth generated by clean LNG to fund our own energy transition, this government has given Canadians a carbon tax, which makes us all poorer and virtually no impact on the world's GHGs. We will axe the tax and sell the world cleaner fuels that will lower global...
The Honourable Member for Surrey Centre.
Madam Speaker, last week I was proud to announce funding to two excellent organizations in Surrey that are helping our veterans. BC Yukon, Royal Canadian Legion Foundation, and the Legion's Veterans Village received $9 million to help our veterans facing homelessness with access to housing and wraparound services. While the opposition talks about program cuts, our government is there for our veterans and the groups that support them. And just last month, Pacific Can announced $3.8 million to Health Tech Connects, a bioscience company based in Surrey, which has developed NeuroCatch, a brain imaging device that leads to more accurate diagnoses of concussions and head injuries. Thanks to the federal funding, Health Tech Connects will increase its operational, sales, and operational capacities to create 40+ highly skilled jobs. Madam Speaker, this is a tremendous illustration of our government's commitment to continue to strengthen Canada's economy at home and around the world.
The Honourable Member from Montmagny-Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Madam Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal government, our borders are in alarming disarray. The Liberals are imposing chaos, and Canadians are paying the price. This Liberal Prime Minister decided to open Canada's doors wide in 2016 without any controls. The result? A broken immigration system, growing border tensions, and now threats from the U.S. with damaging tariffs for Canada if the government doesn't do more to secure our borders. Criminals have taken control, with networks of smugglers charging upwards of $5,000 per person for illegal crossings. The Liberal government has failed in its fundamental responsibility to protect our borders and guarantee the security of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve better. They deserve a strong Prime Minister who will take concrete action to defend Canada's interests and restore order at our borders. The security of Canadians can wait no longer. It's time for this Liberal government to offer security. It's the only thing they really want, elections.
For Portage Lisgar.
Last night, the leader of the NDP voted to put his pension over his country, propping up the Liberals once again. Remember when he ripped up the NDP's coalition deal with the Liberals, saying that they were, quote, too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people? It was nothing but a stunt, Madam Speaker. The truth is, the NDP leader supports everything this Prime Minister does. He supports the carbon tax, voting for it 24 times, making it harder for Canadians to eat, heat, and house themselves. He supports the Liberals' inflationary deficits, voting to fund waste like the Prime Minister's Arrive scam app. And he even supports their hug a thug policies that have led to crime and chaos in our streets. It's time to stop the madness, Madam Speaker. Every day this Prime Minister remains in power, it's because of the leader of the NDP. Canadians deserve better than this weak Prime Minister and their second-string NDP cheer squad. Madam Speaker, it's time for a carbon tax election.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, the Conservative Party of Canada has absolutely no shame. Think about unbelievable but true. They actually voted against a tax break for the holiday season. Wow. Now, this is the real burner on this issue, Madam Speaker. This is what the Conservatives said during the last election, quoting from their platform: to help families and help hard-hit retail stores recover, Canada's Conservatives will implement a month-long GST holiday. The leader of the Conservative Party then tweets, we will remove GST for a month of December. Madam Speaker, incredible. How do each and every one of them say, on the one hand, they're going to get rid of it, and then when it comes time to vote, one by one, they stood in their place and they voted against giving a tax break to Canadians, Madam Speaker. I say shame on each and every one of them. And by the way, Madam Speaker, how would you define hypocrisy?
Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Madam Speaker, we hear the Liberal government time and again expressing concern about the escalating dangers of nuclear weapons. But where are the necessary actions? Things are only getting worse. In the past week alone, Russia expanded its nuclear doctrine and tested a new missile against Ukraine. North Korea advanced its missile program with outside support, and Belarus became a nuclear host state. Canada's response? Vague statements of concern while clinging to outdated deterrence policies. But there is a solution: the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This treaty has 98 nations already on board and addresses the humanitarian devastation of nuclear weapons. It's time for Canada to engage. At minimum, we need to send an official observer delegation to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons meeting in March 2025. Many NATO allies have already done so. Why hasn't Canada? Madam Speaker, New Democrats have always advocated for urgent nuclear disarmament and will continue to work towards a safe and peaceful future.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. If they say that faith lifts mountains, it's solidarity, brotherly love that help us climb them. On November 8th and 9th, Jérémy J. Fortin, an infantry sergeant in the armed forces from the municipality of Saint-Valentin, walked a distance of 100 kilometers, carrying a weight of 100 pounds on his shoulders, all in less than 24 hours. The goal? To raise funds for the Cancer Research Society in honor of his brother Jason, who is currently battling the disease. The challenge, which started in Rivière-à-Pierre, ended with an ascent of the 400 steps leading to the Plains of Abraham. This exceptional feat was a reflection of the fight against the disease, with the 100 pounds representing the burden that cancer sufferers must carry and many hardships along the way. But it was surrounded by friends, family, his brother Jason, as well as lots of love that Jay completed the course, raising nearly $40,000 for the cause in the process. Congratulations, Jay, and thank you for being so inspiring.
The Honourable Member for Fundy Royal.
Madam Speaker, at their busiest time of year, the Prime Minister has just buried small business under a mountain of complicated bureaucracy. Only Liberals could dream up a policy where Pokemon cards are GST exempt, but hockey cards are not.
Right.
Train and Lego sets for kids are GST exempt, but train and Lego sets for adults are not. Physical video games are exempt, but downloadable games are not. Small businesses are being told to make these ridiculous assessments or risk paying hefty fines to the CRA. Canadians are calling for real tax relief. Liberals are defending an indefensible policy, but they're under strict orders to not step outside the party line. One Liberal MP who was threatened into silence said, "It says a lot about where our government is at right now, and it says a lot about some of the shackles that have been put around MPs. But Canadians know this says a lot about how bad things are after 9 years of this Liberal Prime Minister. So when will he finally call a carbon tax election?"
Member for Kingston and the Islands.
Well, there you have it, Madam Speaker. The party that has been preaching for years about axing the tax didn't even have the ability to axe the tax yesterday. Yesterday, we saw a GST holiday passed in this House for Canadians over the hardest time of the year when it comes to stretching their wallets. But we shouldn't be surprised. The Leader of the Opposition, who, by the way, ran on this axing of the GST for 1 month in 2021, suddenly is able to control all of his members. As a matter of fact, one Conservative recently said, quote, "Everybody is being watched. What we say, what we do, who we talk to," end quote. I feel sorry for Conservatives, Madam Speaker. The reality is they're unable to vote on behalf of their constituents. We made a significant advancement yesterday in helping Canadians with affordability, Madam Speaker. Unfortunately, when the time came to actually axe the tax, Conservatives...
Questions orales.
Oral questions?
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Walton Hills.
Madam Speaker, Statistics Canada just released data showing a sharp decline in per capita GDP last quarter. This is the 6th consecutive quarterly decline. This is a made-in-Canada per capita recession caused by government that stubbornly refuses to listen to everyone from the Bank of Canada to private sector economists. So when will the government start listening to the experts, heed common sense, and start cutting taxes on investment, energy, and income to save Canadians from this collapsing economy?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing.
GDP per capita is one measure, and the Conservatives continue to raise it. So let's focus on it for a moment, Madam Speaker. Our country's GDP is in fact growing. On that measure, though, specifically, we exceed GDP per capita by leaps and bounds compared to the UK, to France and Japan, Madam Speaker. That is World Bank data and that is IMF data. On the issue of tax cuts, which the Conservatives love to talk about, Madam Speaker, yesterday they had an opportunity to cut taxes for Canadians, all Canadians, and they said no. They showed who they are, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, last month, National Bank said GDP per capita has fallen by about 4% cumulatively since 2022, which is unprecedented outside a recession. And now the economy is threatened with 25% tariffs that the Chamber of Commerce says could shrink Canada's GDP by another 2.6%. The bigger decline in GDP would come from this government's policies, not for potential tariffs. That's because of its tax hikes on investment and income. So when will the government reverse course, start cutting taxes on investment and income to save Canadians from this collapsing economy?
Madam Speaker, it seems like the member was not in the House yesterday because actually it's interesting his question, but the real question that Canadians have in their mind, all those watching, why would the Conservative vote against a tax cut, Madam Speaker? Right. Imagine a tax cut. You know what Canadians are talking about is affordability, affordability, affordability. Yesterday, they had the opportunity to show to Canadians that they are their voice in Ottawa. But what we saw yesterday is that they're the voice of their leader in Ottawa, Madam Speaker, voting against a tax cut at a time where families need support.
The honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, that was a tax cut on consumption, not investment and income. Madam Speaker, U.S. Border Patrol has released alarming data. CBS Boston reported on November 11th that a total of 155 suspects on the terror watch list were encountered at the southern U.S. border in 2024, but double the number were encountered on the northern border and arrested 361. And now Canada is threatened with 25% tariffs because of illegal border crossings. What is this government's plan to protect our borders, our trade, and Canadians from terror?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, our plan is very simple to tackle affordability. That's what we did yesterday, Madam Speaker. We offered a tax cut to Canadians at a time where they need it. But what is shameful and what is on the mind of every Canadian, the question is, why would the Conservative vote against a tax cut? Madam Speaker, I'm sure people are watching at home and they say, they must have been missing something. What's happening to the Conservative? We say, axe the tax, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, they had a chance not to do slogan, but to do something for Canadians, and they failed miserably. Madam Speaker, Canadians need a break. That's
the Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, after 9 years, this Prime Minister's economic vandalism is the biggest risk for Canadian families. Today, StatsCan revealed that per capita GDP went down for a 6th consecutive quarter. This is a purpose-built recession in Canada in per capita GDP caused by this government's tax hikes and inflationary spending. Supported by the Bloc Québécois, this Prime Minister has caused the worst decrease in standards of living for Canadians over 40 years. He doesn't seem to have a plan. When will he finally trigger elections so we can elect a Prime Minister who does have a plan? The Honourable Minister, Madam Speaker, people watching at home will really wonder where this member across the way, where he was yesterday. Let me be clear, we do have a plan. It's to cut taxes, which is exactly the Conservative slogan, axing the tax. But instead, yesterday, we saw that Conservatives only have slogans, whereas we on this side of the House care about what Canadians care about, affordability, affordability, affordability. Yesterday, the Conservatives missed a great opportunity to show whose side they're on. And on this side of the House, Canadians understand that we know what families are going through. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, yesterday, the Conservatives voted against a temporary band-aid political maneuver. This is simple electioneering. This is handing out baubles, Madam Speaker. That's what we voted against. Yesterday, we learned that StatsCan has reported that Canadian per capita GDP went down for the 6th quarter in a row. This is a bleak reality. When will the Prime Minister put an end to this economic vandalism, trigger an election, so that we can actually axe taxes and elect a new Prime Minister who actually has a plan for Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Madam Speaker, once again, my colleague is repeating the slogans that his leader has fed him. Our plan is to fundamentally help Canadians who need that help right now. They need financial assistance, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're axing taxes. Why is my Quebec Conservative colleague, why is he so against the idea of axing taxes? Why did he vote against it? Why did all his other Quebec colleagues vote against this idea? Quebecers know that the federal government is here for them. And that's what we're doing, especially during the holiday period. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Madam Speaker, the Quebec government just wrote to the federal government to ask them to abolish the religious exception, which enables hate speech to be made on grounds of religious belief. Quebec is tired of Ottawa's inaction, which is leading to greater tension in Montreal and which encourages speech that may lead to violence. And luckily, the Bloc Québécois has just tabled a bill which would abolish the exception on religious grounds. There should be no valid excuse for encouraging hate, including religious grounds. Will the minister finally do something? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Madam Speaker, we completely understand the numbers and data about the increase in hate in our society, whether in Quebec or the rest of Canada. It's very concerning. We need to take action to fight hate, and I am looking forward to working with this member, with the Bloc Québécois and the government of Quebec in order to do something about hates. We are simply asking, with the help of the Bloc Québécois, to be able to stop being stuck in this House so that we can actually turn to legislation and fight hate. The Honourable Member. Well, whatever politicians claim to want to do to reduce hate speech will not actually help as long as Ottawa doesn't have the courage to ask for the religious exception to be abolished. Only the Bloc Québécois is asking for this. Hate speech is supposed to be a criminal offense, period. Tolerating it on religious grounds actively harms our societal well-being. Liberals have a choice. They can continue to support this kind of hate speech, or they can support the Bloc Québécois legislation. Will they make the right choice? The Honourable Minister. What I'd like to say about fighting hate speech is that we currently have on the table here in the House Bill C-63, which does also touch on hate speech in the Criminal Code of Canada. So if the Bloc Québécois wants to make those changes in the Criminal Code, there's already a way forward in this House. And if they want to work with us to promote that bill, I will be very happy to cooperate with them. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Pétatrie. Madam Speaker, this government is allowing its own Crown Corporation to attack workers. Canada Post has laid off striking workers, which is an illegal and brutal method for trying to get them to back down. This is disgusting. This is a violation of workers' basic right to strike. These workers are fighting to protect good jobs and decent wages. The minister needs to step up and call Canada Post back to line. Will the Liberals do something to defend workers' rights? Or will they let Canada Post take brutal action against workers? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, the government knows that this labour action will have significant, severe effects on millions of people. No one wants this strike, Madam Speaker. We know that there are many organizations, charitable organizations in this country that count on Canada Post during the holidays. And we know that the most severe impacts will affect remote regions. So we would encourage both parties to keep working together to resolve this issue.
Enter.
Madam Speaker, this government has once again allowed its Crown Corporation to walk all over workers. Not only did Canada Post illegally lay off striking workers, they also cut off the medical benefits for people like Mark Caron, who has cancer and now has to pay thousands of dollars for medication. This is despicable. It's intimidation, and it's a violation of workers' fundamental right to strike. So what does this minister have to say to Mark Caron and the thousands of workers who've been abused by Canada Post and this Liberal government?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Labour.
Thank you very much, Speaker. On this side of the House, we know that the best deals are always made at the bargaining table. The special mediator has suspended mediation services, and the minister has asked both parties to go and create new proposals that will work and get back to the table, bargain, because Canadians are expecting them to come back and make a deal that works for all. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for Colonial Lake Country.
After
After 9 years, we're seeing this NDP Liberal government's economic vandalism in real time with new data from Statistics Canada today. Real GDP per capita fell 0.4% in the third quarter in 2024. Per capita GDP has fallen now for 6 consecutive quarters. This is a made-in-Canada per capita GDP recession caused by the NDP Liberal carbon tax housing crisis and job-killing, investment-killing capital gains tax hike. The Prime Minister doesn't have a plan. Will he get out of the way for a Prime Minister who does?
Yeah! The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Housing.
Inflation, Madam Speaker, is back to normal levels. Unemployment levels in this country are around historically low levels. That member continues to talk about GDP per capita like all of them do. On that measure specifically, which has been roundly criticized by economists as not presenting a fair economic picture, but let's look at it. We exceed the UK, France, and Japan. And yesterday, they had a chance to vote for a tax cut for Canadians, and what did they do? They did what they always did. They voted on the opposite side. They don't care about the middle class. They don't care about everyday Canadians.
Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, what that member opposite does not want to talk about is that the new GDP data represents the worst standard of living decline in Canada in 40 years. The Canadian dollar is the lowest it's been in 5 years. And more costs to Canadians are on the way with the new U.S. administration wanting to put a 25% tariff on all Canadian exports. The Prime Minister's response? To hike taxes, like the carbon tax, which will be going up on April 1st, which will make the cost of everything go up. The Prime Minister doesn't have a plan. Will he get out of the way for a Prime Minister who does?
Yeah! The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, I think Canadians respect principle, but they have challenges with duplicity. I know that member to be a strong advocate of small businesses in this country. I know that because she herself is a small business owner. In the past 7 days, we've had the Canada Carbon Rebate apply to small businesses in the terms of thousands of dollars, which is tremendous. Last night, we had a vote in this chamber about axing a tax which reduces the GST on the small businesses that member defends constantly in this chamber. I just don't understand the duplicity when she can't find her conscience and vote in favor of a tax that will help businesses in BC and right around the country.
Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
While the U.S. economy roars, real GDP per capita in Canada falls. It's a made-in-Canada recession, and these NDP Liberals have presided over the worst standard of living decline in this country in 40 years. Food bank use at records never seen before. Now the United States is going to hit us with a 25% tariff. And what's their plan? It's to raise taxes. This NDP Liberal government is going to raise their job-killing carbon tax. This Prime Minister doesn't have...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, he talks about our relations with the United States. I remember back when I was first elected in 2016, what did we see with the rise of Donald Trump in the United States? We saw a government that was there for Canadians, and we saw a Conservative Party at that time that was telling the government to capitulate, Madam Speaker.
Right.
We will not do that. We will stand for everyday Canadians, as we always have. On the issue of what happened yesterday, they don't want to talk about it, but let's talk about it. It is very, very critical to note yet again that they turned their back on Canadians. They voted against a tax cut. Years ago, they've done it again. Middle-class tax cuts, they were against them.
Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Let's talk about a record of this failed government that doesn't have a plan to address the 25% tariffs that are going to be imposed by the U.S. government. That is, except for this NDP Liberal Prime Minister to introduce his carbon tax being raised again on April the 1st, along with a host of other taxes. Poverty is up. Food bank use is up.
That's right.
Mortgage costs have doubled. Rent has doubled. If this Prime Minister doesn't have a plan to fix what he has broken, will he get out of the way for a Prime Minister who can fix it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister for Affairs.
Madam Speaker, our trade relationship with the U.S. is of utmost importance, and it's a key priority for our government. What Canadians want to know is where the Conservatives were last night with their axe. They did not vote in favor of axing the tax. On this side of the House, Liberal MPs stood strong with Canadian families and voted to axe the GST for 2 months so Canadians can save up to 13% in Ontario. That means prepared food, children's toys, diapers, car seats, board games, puzzles, video games, and other essentials will be much less expensive over the holidays, Mr. Speaker. Why won't the Conservatives stand with Canadian families?
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West, Saskatoon University.
New data has been released, and it's bad. Canadians' economy is on life support. It's so bad that Stats Canada just reported our economy is collapsing. 6 consecutive quarters of GDP per capita decline. The United States is eating our lunch. Their economy last quarter increased by 2.8%. In Canada, 0.3%. Not 3%, 0.3%. Canadians are going broke, and this Prime Minister doesn't have a plan. When will he get out of the way for a Prime Minister that has a plan?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Let's stick to the facts, Madam Speaker. Over 10 years of Stephen Harper, we saw debt to GDP per capita grow by $1,810. Over almost 10 years. After 8 years of this Liberal government, we've seen it grow by over 11,000, Madam Speaker. Not only are we better for economic growth in this country, we're also introducing mechanisms that are really leading to affordability for Canadians, like PEI's new school food program. We introduced one in Ontario last week and PEI this week, Madam Speaker. And just yesterday, every Conservative had an opportunity to vote to axe the tax.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon University.
New damning data has been released, confirming the results of 9 years of economic vandalism by the NDP Liberal government. We got the worst decline in living standards in 40 years. Consumer debt has hit an all-time record high, and today we learned the GDP per capita fell again for the 6th straight month. Americans are threatening a 25% tariff, and this Prime Minister doesn't have a plan. When will he get out of the way for a Prime Minister who does?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The question's actually been answered on a number of occasions, but I want the member to reflect on what happened yesterday. Remember the Conservative Party and the leader? They go across Canada. They say, we're going to do you a favor. We're going to axe taxes. For the first time, they get a chance to vote on the issue, Madam Speaker. And what do? They abandon the principles. They demonstrate what hypocrites really look like, and they voted against a tax break for the holiday season, Madam Speaker. Even though during the last campaign, they campaigned in favor of it. How would you define hypocrisy, Madam Speaker?
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Madam Speaker, this temporary GST holiday will help everyone except those who need it the most, because low-income households will not actually save on food, which isn't taxable. Same thing for their hydro bill, rent, the telephone or internet bill. None of their basic expenses will be helped by this measure. The Liberals and NDP are subsidizing people who actually have the means while ignoring families who will have to once again tighten their belts over the holidays. Isn't that unfair? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, on this side of the House and throughout Quebec, we still don't understand why the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives voted against this measure. Why they voted against this GST reduction, which is so important for families, so necessary for Quebecers. And which is not the only program, because we have other incredibly important programs, such as dental care, which the Bloc Québécois also voted against. We are here for families. We are here for the most vulnerable Quebecers as well, and we will always help them. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Madam Speaker, this GST reduction will not cover any of the main expenses of these low-income households. That's why they're going to need help over the holidays. But for people who love fine wine, there is a silver lining here. If you win the auction for a Romanée Conti bottle from the legendary year 1945, which is worth around $700,000, well, you'll get $35,000 back from the Liberals and NDP, which is essentially the average after-tax income of Quebecers. What kind of a measure is this, seriously? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, I have a great deal of respect for my colleague across the way. But the Bloc Québécois promised Quebecers that they would represent their interests in Ottawa, and yet yesterday, the Bloc Québécois betrayed Quebecers. At the very time when Quebecers are talking about affordability, at the very time when Christmas is coming up, at the very time when we need to help families, the Bloc Québécois said no to the needs of Quebecers. It's scandalous. And Madam Speaker, on this side of the House, we will always be there to help families and to help Quebecers.
Regina Wascana.
Madam Speaker, Canada's economy grew at a rate nearly 10 times slower than the economy of the United States last quarter. And this week, U.S. President-elect Trump announced that he was considering a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada. This would be devastating to our economy because we export more goods and services to the United States than to the rest of the world combined. Madam Speaker, what is the government's plan to prevent these economically devastating tariffs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, we have had 4 months of consecutive job growth, 1 million new jobs since before the pandemic, 20 straight months of wages outpacing inflation, and we have delivered $50 billion in auto investment that's creating thousands of jobs in this country. Conservatives, their track record, they lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs, and last night they delivered a kick in the teeth for working families, voting against a tax cut that we delivered. We'll be there for workers. All they do is deliver words.
Honourable Member for Regina Wascana.
Madam Speaker, it sounds like this government has no plan to deal with the United States, and Canadians continue to get poorer. Today, Statistics Canada reported that Canada's GDP per capita has declined for 6 quarters in a row. The situation will only get worse if the U.S. follows through on its threat to impose a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada. Madam Speaker, since this Prime Minister has no plan to deal with the United States, will he get out of the way for a Prime Minister who does?
Yeah, way to go, Mike! The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, it is this government that has a clear track record to work with the Trump administration. In 2016, we've worked with them. In 2018, we renegotiated NAFTA when the Conservatives repeatedly asked us to capitulate. We'll continue to stand up for Canadian jobs, Canadian workers, and we'll continue to be at the table with a Team Canada approach, with premiers, with stakeholders across the table. But what I really want to know is every party leader in this House has security clearance except for the leader of the Conservative Party. When will he get his security clearance and join the Team Canada effort?
The Honourable Member for Simcoe Grey.
Madam Speaker, earlier this week, the Finance Minister said that all is well with the Canadian economy. It's Canadians that just aren't feeling that good. It's a vibe session. But new economic data has just released from Statistics Canada and has now confirmed a sixth quarter with a decline in GDP. Add to that an incoming U.S. administration threatening 25% tariffs across the board. If this Prime Minister doesn't have a plan beyond bad vibes, will he get out of the way for...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Inflation is back to normal levels because of the economic stewardship of this government. Unemployment is at historically low levels as well. Madam Speaker, they continue to talk about economic issues these days. Let's talk about it, but let's look at their record. We cut taxes for the middle class. They were against it. We did that twice, in fact, and twice they were against it. We cut taxes for small businesses. They were against it. During the worst years of the pandemic, we put forward emergency measures to support small businesses. They were against it. And last night, we introduced a tax cut for every Canadian, and they were against it. They talk out of both sides of their mouth, Madam Speaker. They are not serious.
The Honourable Member for Simcoe Grey.
Madam Speaker, this government is just not serious. Canadians are facing a made-in-Canada per capita GDP recession, and the NDP Liberals have overseen the worst standard of living decline in Canada in 40 years. But what's the Liberal plan? Quadruple the carbon tax, increase housing taxes, and implement a capital gains tax increase. That's without a 25% tariff in place yet. A 2-month tax trick won't make those bad vibes disappear.
That's right.
Since the Prime Minister doesn't have a real plan, will he get out of the way for a Prime Minister who will?
Way to go, Terry! The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I think the Conservative photocopier must be out of toner because they've asked the same question 15 times today, Madam Speaker. I'll say it again. Under GDP per capita, Madam Chair, under Harper, it rose by $1,800 in a decade. In the last decade, under this Liberal government, it's risen by over $11,000. I hope your batteries on your calculators are okay. $11,000 is more than $1,800. But yesterday, the Conservatives all had the opportunity to vote to axe the tax, and they didn't. It's because they don't care about affordability for Canadians. They only want to axe the tax it helps their wealthy oil and gas donating friends.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
People in Nunavut are desperate for relief from high sky food prices. Infant formula is upwards of $80. People even feel that every time there is Jordan's principal funding, the Northwest Company increases the price of food even more. People are pleading to the Liberals, but all they offer is another study. When will this government stop supporting corporate greed and finally help to alleviate poverty?
Here, here.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And just recently, the Prime Minister was in Prince Edward Island and announcing our school food program, which is going to put, on average, about $800 in the pockets of the people that are affected. In Ontario, we just had it done last week. It joins Manitoba and Newfoundland in helping hundreds of thousands of kids. And I can tell you, we look forward to all provinces and territories signing up for this program because it goes hand in glove with our GST.
Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Liberals claim they're committed to reconciliation, but their actions don't match their words. They said they'd fix the Indigenous infrastructure gap, but it's only getting worse.
Shame.
With piecemeal funding that deliberately obstructs self-determination. Indigenous communities have been saying they need reliable roads, homes, airports, and marinas. But the Liberals, they're always letting people down. Why do the Liberals keep failing Indigenous peoples and underfunding their infrastructure?
Good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'd like to thank the member opposite for her question, and it's an important one. And our government is committed to closing the infrastructure gap by 2030. Since 2016, we've put more than $25 billion in terms of infrastructure, which has meant more than 9,000 infrastructure projects in Canada for Indigenous people. We're going to continue to work towards reconciliation. We're going to continue to work towards closing the infrastructure gap. And on this side of the House, we continue to be committed to reconciliation.
Absolutely.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury.
Madam Speaker, families in my riding of Sudbury are worried about the added costs of the holiday season. They're seeing inflation and interest rates come down, but they're not really feeling that in their household budgets or at the cash register. What is the government doing to help families in Sudbury?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, that member is the daughter of a coal miner. She grew up in a working-class household. She later became the executive director of community living for Greater Sudbury. She understands, Madam Speaker, the everyday challenges of working people. She's always fought for them, and she'll continue to. She understands yesterday why it was so important to put forward the tax cut that we did. This will help families. This will help workers across the country, something that Conservatives don't understand. Think of that young family especially who wants to go out to eat, who wants to buy that car seat for their growing family. All of that is GST exempt now for 2 months.
Wow. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
This government has no border plan and no immigration plan. While the minister's busy rage tweeting and name calling, he has no answer for how to manage over 3 million temporary residents before the deadline, no strategy for removals, and no serious border enforcement measures are in place. The minister's antics are not just embarrassing, they're reckless, risking chaos at our border and straining relations with our closest allies. So, will the immigration minister quit his histrionics and present a Canada First plan to fix the immigration system he broke?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Madam Speaker, let's talk about the Conservatives' record when it comes to the border. They slashed over 1,000 jobs from CBSA, even when they were warned that that would be an increase of human trafficking, drugs, and guns into this country. What else did they do? They cut 600 officers from the counter-terrorism unit that eventually had to be pulled from other departments within the RCMP because their mismanagement was so bad, and it left officers off the line of duty for things like organized crime.
The Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, the government didn't answer my earlier question on a very serious issue, so I'll ask it again. U.S. Border Patrol released alarming data. CBS Boston reports that 155 suspects on the terror watch list were encountered on the southern U.S. border this year, but 361 suspects on the watch list were arrested on the northern border, more than double the number. And now Canada is threatened with 25% tariffs because of illegal border crossings. So what is the government's plan to protect our borders, our trade, and Canadians from terrorism?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I'll tell you our plan. Our plan is to invest in our border services agencies, unlike what the Conservatives did. They cut over 1,000 employees from CBSA and have the nerve to try and lecture us about border management. They cut over 600 employees from the RCMP dealing with counterterrorism, and what had to happen? Those members had to be brought in from other departments within the RCMP just to make up for the mismanagement of border services and counterterrorism under the Conservatives. Our plan will be
the honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, everything is broken. For over a century, there was a consensus on the importance and value of immigration, yet that is being placed at risk by this government's incompetence. By December of next year, 3 million visas will expire and individuals will need to obey the law and voluntarily leave Canada. The problem is, there is no way to ensure that they will leave. My question is simple. What is the Prime Minister's plan to enforce and ensure the rule of law so that people who need to leave Canada actually leave?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Immigration is a key to growing our economy and strengthening our communities. Canadians want a robust and sustainable immigration system that sets Canada and all who come here up for success. And the Level Plans is doing just that. We are reducing the number of temporary and permanent residents in short to alleviate pressures on housing and infrastructure. These measures will achieve long-term growth and ensure a well-managed, sustainable immigration system. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member for Niagara Falls.
Speaker, the hope that someone leaves Canada is not a plan. My own community has 4 international border crossings. Cross-border visitation and tourism have been a strength of our region, yet that is all being placed at risk because of this government's incompetence. We have 3 million expiring visas in Canada by the end of December next year. Without a plan, many of those individuals may attempt to cross the border illegally into the United States. So again, what is the government's plan so that people who need to leave Canada actually leave?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, you want to talk about incompetence. How does the member who represents a border town actually talk to his constituents about the fact that the Conservative /600 RCMP employees from dealing with counterterrorism had to pull those employees from other places like dealing with organized crime? How does that member talk to his community about the fact that they cut over 1,000 CBSA agents under their time, which led to an increase of human trafficking, drugs, and guns right into his community?
The Honourable Member for Abitibi James Bay, Nunavik EU. No government should spend public money to buy votes. But even if the Liberals weren't doing that, it would be inexcusable to give $250 checks to couples earning $300,000 a year while leaving out retirees. 40% of Quebec retirees receive the Guaranteed Income Supplement. That's more than 700,000 people. We refuse to believe that people like this are rolling in cash. If the Liberals insist on their terrible check-sending idea, will they at least include low-income retirees? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker. The Bloc Québécois is anything but consistent. Yesterday, they voted against measures to reduce the GST. At the same time, they voted against the reduction of the pension eligibility age from 67 to 65. They voted against the GIS for seniors. They voted against an OAS 10% boost. They voted against all sorts of measures for seniors, so they are anything but consistent. The Honourable Member for Abitibi James Bay, Nunavik EU. For months now, the Liberals have been insisting that a $3 billion investment to increase old age security for seniors 65 to 74 would cost too much. They say there's not enough money to help seniors. They don't have $3 billion for our seniors, but they found almost $5 billion to send out vote-buying checks to people who earn $150,000 a year. Clearly, it's not a question of money. It's a question of priorities. We care about seniors. Why do the Liberals only care about buying votes in the next election? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I'd like my colleague to look her constituents in the face and tell them where the Bloc was when the government reduced the pension eligibility age from 67 to 65. Our government set up a dental plan for Canadians over almost a million Quebecers are eligible for it. People in her riding benefited from this plan. When she goes back to her riding, she ought to look her constituents in the face and tell them she voted against seniors and against the dental plan.
Madam Speaker, Canadians were shocked to see footage of a violent carjacker shooting at commuters. And of course, this individual was out on bail. The rate of violent crime in Canada has gone up 50% since this Prime Minister took office. Gun crime has gone up every year since this Prime Minister has been in office. And according to a report just released by the Fraser Institute, Canada's rate of crime is 14% higher than in the United States. When will this Prime Minister reverse his hug-a-thug policies?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, what we've seen in the last 24 hours in Toronto is completely unacceptable and terrifying to the people in the city that I call home. We need to take action strictly and strongly on exactly what is happening in Toronto. The federal bail law is very, very clear. If someone is at a serious risk of reoffending, they're not to be given bail. I'm going to cite Premier Ford because his reaction was correct. He said, quote, "It's ridiculous. These JPs, these judges need to start keeping people in jail. We need tough judges and tough JPs when it comes to crime. People are fed up with it." That includes people in this House, Madam Speaker. Canadians are fed up with what we're seeing.
The Honourable Member for Fundy Royal.
Madam Speaker, this is ridiculous. These guys have been in government for 9 years.
Yes.
What happened yesterday is a direct result of their policies. Auto theft, Madam Speaker, is up 45% since 2015. In Toronto, it's up 328%. This is a direct result of this government's failure on bail and failure on crime.
Yep.
Gun crime is up 116%, Madam Speaker. Homicides, 28%. When will this government, when will they step aside so Conservatives can crack down on crime and bring home safe streets for all Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, with respect to being tough on crime, the critical piece is the administration of justice at the level of the province. And I want to point out what Premier Ford just said. He talked about JPs and provincial court judges, both of whom he appoints. What's really illustrated for this from that member from Nova Scotia is that in his very province, JPs who decide things like bail have to have legal training before they're appointed. That is an example of best practice in our federation. That is not the practice in Ontario. If we're going to improve the quality of the justice being rendered, we need to ensure people like JPs deciding things about serious risks of reoffending have legal training in Ontario the way they do.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, after 9 years of crime, chaos, and disorder, the legacy of this NDP Liberal government's radical, soft-on-crime policies is in tatters. This Prime Minister's hug-a-thug recklessness has caused violent crime to surge, and Canadians were shocked to see a violent, armed carjacking on our streets. It's time to put Canadians' safety first. When will this government admit their failure, crack down on violent repeat offenders who are spreading deadly drugs and violence in communities, or better yet, just get out of the way so Conservatives can get the job done?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, the people that decide to arrest an individual are police. The people that prosecute the bad guys are provincial crowns. The people that render the decisions are provincially appointed JPs and provincial judges. The people that run the jails for people to be placed in when they're denied bail are provincial detention centres. All of those relate to the province. The province needs to do its part, invest in the resources for cops, crowns, JPs and detention centres so we can keep Canadian cities safe.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener South Hespeler.
Madam Speaker, in my riding of Kitchener South Hespeler, the Housing Accelerator Fund is being praised by municipal partners, nonprofit housing providers, and my constituents who are seeking options for affordable and accessible housing. The fund will provide over $40 million to Kitchener to fast-track the construction of over 1,200 new homes over the next 3 years and more than 37,500 homes over the next decade. A few weeks ago, the Conservative leader announced his plan to cut this funding for Kitchener and communities across the country. Can the minister explain the cost of Conservative cuts?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Madam Speaker, I want to begin by thanking my honourable colleague for her advocacy, which helped secure $42.4 million for Kitchener to help the city build more homes quickly. Madam Speaker, the city is already moving on ambitious zoning reforms, changes to permitting processes that make it easier to build homes, near transit, near services, near opportunities. It's exciting because they're moving forward with new projects, adding hundreds of social housing units for low-income families, and taking part in an extraordinary initiative in partnership with Habitat for Humanity to build 10,000 homes at a half price in the region in which the city is located. The Conservative Party plans to cut this essential program, which will only...
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisgar.
Canada's closest ally and largest trading partner is threatening crippling 25% tariffs, yet this Prime Minister is simply too weak to stand up for Canadians and defend our economy. Worse, his radical Environment Minister is in denial and declared at committee this week, quote, "Of course we're going to continue with the carbon tax." Not satisfied with just punishing Canadians here at home, now he's even plotting a global carbon tax on international shipping that will jack up the price of everything. How much pain do these NDP Liberals need to inflict upon Canadians before we can have a carbon tax election?
Yay! The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate.
He's making stuff up, Madam Speaker. This is coming from an MP that sent homophobic mail to an opponent to households during an election to attack an opponent. This is coming from an MP who published a deep fake video and a misinformation campaign that caused the London Free Press to say the same tactics are being mirrored on a larger scale by Russian disinformation campaigns. This is coming from an MP who has said axe the tax in this House so many times I can't count it, and yesterday he voted to keep the tax on. He voted against a tax cut for Canadian families. Nobody believes him, Madam Speaker.
No one believes you.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisgar.
Incredible skills at distracting and deflecting, and he may take Canadians for fools, but they see the difference between a temporary 2-month tax trick and real permanent tax relief. While our largest trading partners threatens devastating tariffs, their radical Environment Minister is hell-bent on quadrupling his carbon tax, and he simply wants to destroy our energy sector. So why won't the Prime Minister just stop this madness and call a carbon tax election so Canadians can choose between a 2-month temporary tax trick and axing the tax for everyone on everything forever?
Yay! The Honourable Minister of Housing.
These guys are all tax and no axe, Madam Speaker. Think about it. Last night, they literally voted to keep a tax on Christmas. We are moving forward with a tax cut to relieve families of the burden of the cost of things like car seats, diapers, groceries, clothing for their kids, and gifts over the holidays. Madam Speaker, what's worse, they're also talking about cutting the programs that families rely upon for housing, for dental care, for health care, to make life more affordable. The Conservatives are going to cut programs. The government is going to cut taxes.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lille, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Madam Speaker, for 9 years now, the Liberal government, its inflationary taxes, and its red tape have been smothering our businesses. The unfair application of the harmonized sales tax laws is now forcing RV dealers in Quebec to pay Ontario taxes on products sold in Quebec. The result? Thousands of jobs at risk, businesses under pressure, and all this to pay a tax that the CRA will just end up giving back. Madam Speaker, when will the Liberal government cut its useless red tape and stop penalizing Quebec businesses? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am aware of the file that my colleague referred to. We are examining it. The current procedure applies to every sector in Canada. So we are looking into changing it. We will be having that discussion with the Minister of Finance, but it's a complex file because this approach applies all across the country to every sector.
The Honourable Member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Madam Speaker, good news for Canadians. Our government has declared a GST holiday on groceries, snacks, and clothing and gifts for kids, all exempt from the GST starting December 14th. An immediate lift for all Canadians as they celebrate the gift of Christmas. Could the government share why this deserves support from all members of this House, especially Conservatives, who all ran on the idea in 2021 but turned Grinch last night and whose hearts are still 3 sizes too small?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, he was a broadcaster in his community, well in touch with that community, covering everyday stories, so he's well placed to raise this matter. It is very true. Last night we cut taxes for everyday people, for all Canadians, on so many items, And Madam Speaker, we know it's an important time because this is the most expensive time of year for workers, for families, for Canadians. And what do we see in the January months? Anyone who's worked in retail or restaurants or sectors like that knows that January offers a bit of a lull. But this offers stimulus. People will go back out there and get involved in the economy. On the Conservatives, they're not serious.
Honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Madam Speaker, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women has called out Canada's slow progress to end the ongoing genocide against Indigenous women, girls, and diverse gendered people. The Liberals are failing to implement the calls for justice from the National Inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, failing to end forced sterilization, failing to address the overrepresentation of Indigenous women in penitentiaries. When will the Liberals stop violating the human rights of Indigenous women, girls, and diverse gendered folks and uphold international law?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Madam Speaker, I think we all agree that we need to do more to address murdered and missing Indigenous women in Canada. That's why one of the key budget items in the last budget was a red dress alert. We're listening to stakeholders. We're following the good practices, like in communities like Nova Scotia that are showing how to do this. We know that we can do better on this, and our government continues to be committed to doing so.
Good job. Good job, Jaime.
And that brings to the end oral questions. Je vois l'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Saint-Jean on a point of order. Madam Speaker, we have consulted amongst ourselves, amongst parties, and we consider that there is unanimous consent for the following motion: that the House offer its support to journalist Daniel Renaud of La Presse, who has a price on his head by members of organized crime, that remember that the work of journalists is one of the pillars of our democracy, and that it must be exercised without fear of reprisal or threats to the physical or moral integrity of those who practice it.
Que tous ceux qui s'opposent à ce que l'on...
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion, please say no.
La Chambre a entendu les longs...
The House has heard the motion. That all those opposed, please say no. Carried.
That's it. Daily routine of business. Affaires courantes. Dépôt de documents.
Tabling of documents.
Déclaration de...
Statements by ministers.
Interparliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees. Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motion.
Motions.
Présentation de...
Presenting petitions.
L'honorable député.
The honourable member of Manicouagan. Thank you, Madam Speaker. So today I'm proud to table two petitions supporting Bill C-319, supporting my colleague from Shefford, the goal being to put an end to injustice, inequality, and discrimination for those that are over the age of